Priest gets up to give his homily. He starts giving us the old hell's fire and damnation stuff, and it really pissed me off. I stood up and I cursed that priest from the congregation, stomped out of there. I could not believe that he gave me all that crap. I was sitting there trying to put aside my feelings and prejudices and all this other stuff just to embrace what's there. And all of a sudden, right in front of me, everything just went gold. From floor to ceiling to the top went gold. And there was a figure at the top looking down, smiling. And it lasted for about 10 seconds. And it went away.
In my online community, Love Covered Life Academy, I am running a free 5-day activation, Awaken Your Magic 2.0. We're going to be deep diving into metaphysical understanding of how the energy centers work and the energy flow in the body works, a powerful guided meditation to support you in your journey, and daily practices that can help us embody higher states of consciousness. I'm so excited. In our last Awaken Your Magic activation, we had over 400 people join. I would love to double or even triple that amount this time. Check the link in the description to sign up for free. Can't wait to see you there.
I am here today with Denis Davis, who has a fascinating story. He contracted Agent Orange in Vietnam, which dominated his life after the war, and went on to have some profound spiritual experiences and epiphanies where he was able to get information related to his health. And he's also had a lifetime of other spiritual experiences. So Denis, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to learn more about your story.
Well, thank you, Mel. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. So I'd love to have you start and share your story in whatever way you want to.
Sure. Well, I'd like to just tell the story. It's a story that starts with some strange things and ends up with a muddy river. It actually began, I was born in the late 1940s up in the rural Oregon in a very Catholic family with 15 children. I was number 11 of the 15. And as you can imagine, it's a combination of chaos and a lot of rewarding experiences being with the family. They were very Catholic, very Catholic. And while the Catholics really taught us values of love and forgiveness, they also gave us a very large helpings of judgment and guilt with that. And you couldn't attend other churches, you couldn't belong with other things, lots of negative stuff that I battled with and fought with for the first third of my life. In addition to that, because it was highly Catholic, I went to Catholic school with the nuns for 12 years. Now, the good part of that is there was only 21 kids in our class, and we still Zoom every other week, all of our high school graduates. Yeah, we still do.
Neat.
But it also left a few marks. The nuns were a little bit difficult to deal with. They gave me a great education, but when I was in Vietnam, I would wake up at night in nightmares that I was back in high school with the nuns. And when I got out of the service, I would wake up in nightmares that I was back in Vietnam and all of the sergeants were nuns. So I think they had a bit of an influence on my psyche for all that time. But needless to say, I was an empath at a very early age. I can remember as a kid finishing people's sentences when they tried to tell me something, understanding who they were and where they were at in spite of what they presented to me. It was just a common thing every day. That's not everybody did that. It's just part of listening to what was going on around me. And I had a very strange experience very young, about 12 years old. I made up my mind. I was mad at my mom about something and she wasn't going to give me what I wanted. So I decided I was going to sell my soul to the devil to get what I wanted. And so I made a pact and I got the devil to come down. And when I did this, I had no clue, of course, what I was doing. And all of a sudden I felt this tremendous, overwhelming spiritual negativity and the nastiest stuff I ever felt in my life. It was horrible coming into my presence. And I learned from the nuns that the devil cannot stand in the name of Jesus. So in the name of Jesus, I asked him to leave. Told him to leave. I didn't ask him, I told him. But that stuck with me, that experience. And it influenced that negativity and that eating at you all the time made me wonder my whole life. I often, and when I was a kid, tried to make I did all the time. I'd make spiritual contact with my friends, but if they were in a crowd, I'd just look at them for a little bit and they'd turn around and look at me. And it taught me that there's so much beyond us other than just our bodies. Our physical beings go way beyond us. So after school, I tried to go to college, couldn't do it. I couldn't stand school. I wanted to be outside working or doing something like that. So eventually I, like a lot of young idiots do, I joined the Army. I didn't even think about the war or anything else. I found myself in Vietnam. I did 2 tours in Vietnam. During that period of time, somebody in the Defense Department got the wise idea that what they could do to see the enemy was to clean all the jungle off. And the jungle there is 300 foot thick of canopies of trees. And so they very heavily sprayed all of central Vietnam with a chemical defoliant called Agent Orange. One of the components of Agent Orange is dioxin, which is the worst carcinogen known to man. So all of the soldiers and many of the Vietnamese people got dosed with this very heavy carcinogen. Of course, none of us knew it at the time. We were just over there doing our job. I did have some, I didn't think when I left Vietnam it ever affected me. I had some very strong spiritual things that happened. One of the things is I was in fear the whole time I was there. And I think that in my case, PTSD was caused by having these extreme bouts of fear all the time. If there was an attack on a position, if you were being shot at, if any of these things were going on, these really high levels of fear came in me. I wasn't one of those guys that did my job in spite of what everybody else said. I was afraid. And this happened right up into the day that I left. So I'm dealing with that the whole time, but I had all these instances where I should have died. I had plane crashes that I was associated with. I had people shooting at me, snipers, that kind of stuff. But I never got a scratch. The whole time I was there, I never got shot. And I wondered why I was not being a victim of these circumstances. I had an experience once where I saw a couple of guys die in front of me, and I actually saw their souls rise out of their bodies. And there was this knife edge. On this side of the knife was life, and on that side of the knife was death. And you could see that. It bothered me. It still does. I also had an instance where I was coming out of a Hoocher. Hoocher was a little place that we lived in. They were a little wood building. And as I stepped out of the threshold, I felt like somebody just hit me and knocked the wind completely out of me. A friend of mine was with me, said, "What is wrong with you?" And without even thinking, I said, "They just shot Bobby Kennedy." And this was before, I didn't hear about it in the paper till a week later, but it was at the precise time that he was killed. I didn't understand that. This all culminated with a couple of instances, and I found myself one night, I think I was asleep, but I'm not sure, but I found myself floating in the black. And I would never have thought about relating this except for what I heard on your podcasts about past life experiences or about near-death experience. But I was in this black void. It was the blackest thing I'd ever seen in my life, and I was just floating up there, just floating away. I didn't have any particular feelings at all, other than I couldn't figure out why I was there and what was going on. And I was in my body, I guess, in the void. And then I was off to one side looking at myself floating with kind of my arms and hands flailing and stuff. And then all of a sudden I started to get very fearful of the black and the darkness. And instantaneously I woke up in my bed. And I never thought anything about that. I thought it was because I was spiritually bereft. And I thought I was spiritually bereft because I couldn't go to Mass while I was in Vietnam. My anchor was going to Mass, and it wasn't available. And this culminated in Christmas Eve of '68 because I was in a place that had Mass. So I went down to Mass with high expectations of positive things happening. And I'm in the church, and the priest gets up to give his homily, and he starts giving us the old hell's fire and damnation stuff and judgmental, all that stuff. And it really pissed me off. I did not want to hear that. I wanted to be hugged. I stood up and I cursed that priest from the congregation. I told him to go to wherever and who he was in very nasty terms and stomped out of there. I could not believe that he gave me all that crap when all we wanted was be just a little hug and affection. That's what us guys needed. We didn't need that kind of. And I stayed out of church for 55 years from that point in time. I just didn't want anything more to do with that. So on the plane coming home, I was in a very bad mortar attack the day of, and I didn't think we were going to get out of there. We got in the plane, and it was an odd thing because normally the planes would land and they'd take the guys off and put them in the terminal, and then they'd take your guys out and put them on. In our case, the plane landed. They kept the motors on the plane running, and some of the guys that were coming off the plane came off the front door, and we went in the back door all the time. The airport was under fire. So I just knew we were going to get killed and die coming out of there. But the plane took off, and as we're circling to go out over Vietnam, I'm looking outside to see how it's changed. And one of the stewardess, I made a point to sit next to a stewardess. I wanted to be next to an American girl coming home. So I got the seat next to the stewardess, and she said, "What is wrong with you guys?" this place is, you could hear a pin drop in there. She said, normally the guys are hooting and hollering and yelling. And I said, well, we just can't believe we're out of here. We can't believe we're there. So then there's a 14-hour flight, which is just dull, dull, dull. And we got to talking about where we were going to land. And the guys, all of a sudden, there was an audible gasp in the airplane. And I can say this. I looked out the window, and there were these two yellow-orange bridge pilings of the Golden Gate sticking up to the fog. And just, the plane erupted. The guys just went crazy. So in getting back, it was hard to adjust because everybody was so against the Vietnam War. I couldn't wear my uniform. There was nothing proud to be said about it. I wanted to hide in the darkness. And so you don't get any support from that when you're back. All the other guys felt the same way. I also was extremely lonely. I needed somebody in my life. And I was a nerd when it came to girls. I didn't know how to date her. So I was working in a service station at the time in Eugene, Oregon, going to the University of Oregon and working part-time. And I decided one day that I was going to ask the next 6 girls my age that came into the service station for a date. And I did, and all 6 of them accepted. And I was shocked that why would anybody want to go out on a date with me? And because of that, I kind of changed my attitude a little bit. And eventually I got engaged to one of those gals. And things were moving along. I was very happy. Although deep inside me, I know that would never work with her. I didn't understand that feeling, but I just knew it would work. And then she broke it off. I got dumped. And I'm telling you, it was the end of the world. I've never felt such pain in my life. It was the most horrible thing that's ever happened to me. I could not get over it. I was in abject pain. And I was laying in bed one night in this pain, and I said, okay, God, I have to know how this dating thing works. I cannot stand this pain. And instantly, in my awareness, I got an epiphany of how relationships work. Now, this wasn't a voice talking to me. I just saw it all. I saw the whole sphere of relationships, the good, the bad, how it worked, what you did, what you had to do, why it worked, why things did this way. It was just, that's the way the world is. I instantly changed that moment. And I noticed the next week that the 4 or 5 girls that I was interested in, I realized that none of them would work with me. None of those girls were. And now they were chasing me. I thought it was so funny because I knew it would not work. It just wasn't there. This ended up me being in Mexico that summer for summer school. And into the room I was in walked this tall girl speaking Spanish. And I thought, that's the tallest Spanish girl I've ever seen. And I thought, well, I'm going to marry that girl. I just knew it was her. So I asked her out on a date. It turned out she lived 30 miles from me up in Oregon. She just spoke Spanish very well. And on our first date, I told her, we're going to get married. And she said, you think so, bud? She said, I'm not marrying any man. I'm not going to do that. No way in hell. And what came out of my mouth came through the spirits. It wasn't me. I would never think to say something like that. But the answer came out, well, that's okay. You're worth waiting for. I'll wait. And I never brought up the subject again. A year later, she asked me if we could get married. And we did. We've been married for 52 years.
Wow, amazing.
Perfect life partner. But I knew from the moment of that epiphany that was going to happen. So what would happen is I get to wrestle with life and I would rail for an answer with God. I got to know this. I was being pushed all the time to understand what was going on spiritually. At the same time, my health is deteriorating. It started out, I really felt fortunate to get out of Vietnam without a scratch. I had a lot of PTSD until I got with events and admitted that I had PTSD and was working with it. I couldn't deal with it. I just had a lot of anger episodes and things like that happened. But the body stuff, I would get the switch that would go off in my body. I'd be functioning just fine. My nickname at the time was Do It. Whatever had to be done, I got it done. And high energy level, getting things done. And then the switch would go off and I was just devastated. I had no energy, a lot of nausea, a lot of physical pain, real bad physical pain. And then it would switch and go back the other way again. Back when I first got out of Vietnam, it didn't happen all the time, just occasionally. And then later on, it got worse. So it started in the background, but it grew over the years. And eventually, the misdiagnosis is this Agent Orange exposure. I still couldn't go to college, though. I tried, I couldn't do it. So I became a musician. We got a little group started, worked up and down the West Coast. And after 3 years, I had another little epiphany. I realized that the people that I met in the music business were in the music business because they had to be there. They may be a good talent, they may be no talent, but they had to be there. And I didn't have to be there. I didn't know what to do. So I decided we my wife and I decided I'd better go back to college. So I went to the U of O and was in the registrar's office waiting for an interview to talk to a career counselor when I saw this book on the shelf that said Federal Registry of Jobs. And I took it down and just opened it up, and it opened right to engineering. And I read in there that there were more engineers dying and leaving the business than there were coming in. So I said, hey, that's the job for me. That's job security. So I went to college and became an engineer. And it turned out that I had a talent for engineering. It was a lot of fun. It was great. I became a heavy construction engineer. I worked on construction sites all over the West Coast, Alaska, Hawaii, everywhere in the US, just bridges, dams, roads, all that kind of stuff. And during this time, this was a very high energy job, high intense job with a lot of travel associated. But I was always trying to figure out the spiritual side of things. It all started, I think the first thing that happened was when I was a musician, my brother was dying of cancer, and he was in Eugene, Oregon, and we were living there at the time. And then I was working in Seattle. So I'd leave Seattle in the late afternoon once a week and drive up to the gig in Seattle and work the nightclub, and then come back for the weekend to see my wife. I stopped in to see my brother at the hospital that night, and he's pretty gaunt. He'd been suffering with his cancer for about 8 or 10 months, and he was very gaunt in the hospital bed. And we were talking just normally like you and I are, and then he said, Dennis, would you please put the door back on the hinges? You're embarrassing the hell out of me here. And I said, John, what are you talking about? I'm not putting the door on the hinges. I'm just sitting here talking to you. These hallucinations, they're so bad, and I can try to jump down, and he mumbled off. And right there, I knew he was dying. I knew he wasn't going to last long. So I went out of the hotel room, called my mom to tell her, but her and Dad already knew. They were very empathic also, and they were headed over to see him. They lived about 400 miles away. So I went on up to my gig in Seattle, did the gig, got off work that night. John had kind of passed out of my mind. And as I was going in, and Cheryl was asleep in bed, I rolled in bed, and just as I was laying down, there he was standing at the foot of my bed, just like you standing in front of me. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He's standing there, I'm like this, he's standing there. And John said, I want you to know that it's all over and I'm fine. So stop worrying about me, would you? And then he gave me a big smile and he was gone. And I elbowed my wife and I said, did you see that? And she said, well, because she was asleep, she didn't see it. But it was very real. And he spoke to me with my ears and stuff. It was really cool. So then I really got interested about a similar thing happened to my sister, but not quite the same thing. She had cancer also and had been suffering for quite a time. And I went to visit her, and some of the family had come over because, of course, a lot of kids, a lot of family were out in the family room laughing and talking and sharing stories. And I became aware that she was with us. And I looked up in the hallway coming from her room out to the kitchen, and there was this kind of a hazy mist there. So I just got up and wandered toward that. And as I walked through the mist, it was ice cold. And when I went to her room and looked at her body, she was breathing very shallowly, but I knew that she was not there. She was the mist. So I went back and stood with her for a little bit. She was out enjoying the conversation and having a good time with her. And she died a couple hours later. So it's just sad stuff, But it was, all that feeling is there. So what happened was the first thing I picked up a book by Betty Eady. You've read her books, I think.
Yeah.
And she was, actually the first one was The Search for Bridie Murphy. I don't know if you ever saw that book. And that's about a guy that's looking for this. He did past life experience, a regression for this gal. And she was Bridie Murphy from Ireland. And, past life stuff, that's demon stuff and devil stuff in the Catholic Church.
Right.
But yet there was a ring of truth to this. And then I found Bridie Murphy's books and then Edgar Casey's books. And because of all that, I started really looking at this, what was going on spiritually, what's happening, what's going on here. And a friend of mine told me about this little bookstore in Portland, Oregon. It was run by these two little delightful old ladies. And I went into the bookstore one day to try and see what was in there, mostly curious. And I was very put off by going in there because of the demon stuff at the church and all that. And I'm in the counter looking at the books, and this little old lady comes up to me that ran the bookstore, and she said, "What can I help you with, dearie?" And I said, "Well, God, I don't want to deal with her. I'm just scared to death now." And so I said, "Well, why don't you teach me, give me something on meditation?" TM was a big thing at the time. She said, "Oh, come over here. I'll show you exactly what I've got." So she took me over the deal, and she got up on the shelf, and she's pulling down all these brochures and stuff. and putting in a package. I quickly stuffed them in an envelope and I got out of there. I was just so put off by that place. Well, when I got home and started going through that stuff, there wasn't a thing in there about meditation. Everything was about channeling. There was article after article after article about channeling. And amongst the articles was an invite to come to a channeling class that weekend, not far from where I was living. So I went up and signed for the channeling class. It took a 2-day class in that. And I found that at the end of 2 days, I learned how to channel. It wasn't a big deal. I just channeled. And all of a sudden, I'm channeling for all these people at this class. And they had a little test at the end where you'd do these channeling sessions. And then the people who were the recipients of the channeling would rate you based upon what they heard you come out of you. That's what always happened to me. It came out. And they got 100% rating from them. It was neat. So I went home, and my wife, she had this hard time with Judaism. She's not a Jew. She was born in a Protestant family, but she's having a hard time with this. And she wanted to know about that. So she said, I want you to channel me. Now, this really put me off because you don't want to be wrong and you don't know quite how this stuff is working. But what I learned in this class was how to take my monkey brain and my body with it. I split my body and my mind into 2 segments. And one is the monkey brain human side. And I would pick that up and set it up on a shelf over here to stay out of my way while I did the channeling. And then I would get in a calm state of mind and just begin speaking, and it would just flood out. And then the channeling I did with her, we did a past life experience where she was in the last Holocaust and was killed there at Auschwitz when she was 14. And so she had all this pent up emotion about that. And one of the things she asked me was, she said, well, where is Hitler and all this stuff? And what came out was that Hitler's in a hell of his own making. And I didn't understand that until recently, but now I think I understand what that means. She also railed on what had happened to the Holocaust and how evil and how bad it was. And I'm trying to make sense of this benevolent God and the evil of the Holocaust. And I'm really wrestling with that back and forth. And so one day I said, God, I've got to know, I have to know about this. I have to know how this works. And instantly, I was transported into a gas chamber in the Holocaust. And amongst all of the strife and turmoil and the anger and the frustration and the fear, you can imagine being in a room with a couple, 300 people. As they began to die, they were transformed into this glorious thing after death. And it was their transformation from being within the evil of the gas chamber to moving into the light was breathtaking, took my breath away. And I could see that somewhere in all of that was the hand of God. I didn't understand how it worked, but I could see that my interpretation of the evil and all of the stuff that I read about, because I couldn't stand the Nazis, I couldn't stand the Holocaust, I didn't want to face any of that. It's horrible. But somewhere in that, there is goodness that came out of all of that bad experience for people. And the vision was, I was complete. I was there. So I decided that I had to do past life regressions of my own to try and figure this out. I found a guy that was a good hypnotist down in Phoenix and started going to him. And the first one he did, he had me walking along the beach. He said, I want you to write you close your eyes, relax. First place, I'm telling myself, there's no way I'm going to let some guy hypnotize me. I'm in control here. No one's going to take my control away. So then I took the monkey brain guy and put him on the shelf and said, you stay over there. I'm going to be involved with this. And I just started listening to what the hypnotist was saying. And he said, I want you to picture yourself walking along the beach. And in the sand, I want you to write your name like you did when you were 12 years old. And so I signed this very distinct Denis Davis in the sand. I thought, boy, that's odd. I have never seen that. I've seen that someplace before, but I didn't quite recall. He went on with this, and eventually he had me walking up a hill on this regression. And he said, when you get to the top of the hill, I want you to look over the hill. Tell me what you see. And I said, well, I don't see anything. He said, well, open your eyes and see. And I looked, and sure enough, there was this very quaint house, very distinct architecture. It had a thatch roof. The ends curved down like this on the tops and the sides. It had these wood doors where the X's on the door was a wood box in the X's. It's a very distinct architecture. And out in the front was my previous life party making wagons, building these wagons by hand, doing all this handwork, building these wagons. And as I went further on to the regression, I come to find out that I was the primo wagon builder at that time. And they later on got to some position of responsibility as a mayor or something like that, where I had to wear this particular outfit. And the outfit was very distinct. It was all red. It had this kind of a silver middle-like belt, and it had this great, large, fluffy hat and stuff. Very distinct. I don't ever recall seeing an outfit like that in my life. So I had this regression. I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that was all about, and so forth. When you're trying to struggle with the spiritual side, you don't necessarily believe what comes to you right off the bat. You're trying to figure it out. And sometimes you say, geez, did I just think that up, or is that something that really happened? About a year and a half later, I was at my sister's house. She was a book editor, and she had all these volumes of books, and I happened to pick one up, and I'm leafing through this big album of paintings. And I turned to this one page, and there's this painting of the exact thing that I saw in that regression, of this guy in his red outfit with a fluffy hat in front of the same type of building, looked exactly the same. And it was circa 1450 in Germany. And I said, geez, maybe there was something to that. I don't know. One of the things I found with channeling was that anybody can channel. All of us have the capability, human beings, we all have the capability of doing that. We have a conflict within us between the physical that we can hang on to, that's very real to us every day. After you've talked about yourself, about getting yourself straight and moving down a path, and then a bunch of stuff comes in and knocks you off balance, and you're back trying to get back on path again. That's what happens to all of us. And of course, it's very easy to believe the physical stuff, although my brother used to tell me it's all an illusion, and I didn't understand what he was saying. But that you believe that because that's what you feel, that's who we are here and how we do it. What I found was that it was so easy to channel that with all this, in the meantime, I had taken these classes from a group called Psi World. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They were kind of like Est and that back in the 70s. And in that class, I wanted to learn how to meditate because I kept trying to do TM transcendental meditation, and my monkey brain just was all over the place. I couldn't control that. And what this guy taught us was a technique where in your mind, you create a workshop. And you can make the workshop, you can tailor the workshop to yourself. So I had this very engineering-oriented workshop with clean walls and the computers and all this kind of stuff. And a very distinct step-by-step process to get into the workshop, which relaxes your mind to allow you to go to the steps to get down to the workshop. And in the workshop, you have a couple of things. One thing is you have an elevator in there, so you can bring people into your workshop. And you have a way to put healing white light on them while they're in there. It's a very effective way to meditate. So one of the things that happened, and I'm doing this workshop stuff, and I found I could meditate with that. I could go there and be there for a while. And one time I got to think, well, my wife was pregnant at the time, and of course in those days you couldn't tell what the sex of the child was yet. And I thought, I wonder what that child is. So I brought my wife down the elevator into the workshop while I was doing a deal. I laid her down on a table and I unzipped her belly, and out popped this little boy. And I said, well, hello, little boy, what's your name? And he gave me his name. And I said, well, when are you coming to us? And he said, I'll be there on the 20th. And I said, okay, well, we'll see you on the 20th then. And I put him back in the belly and zipped him back up again and put a little white light on her and then sent her away. Well, she was due the 20th of April. The 20th of April came and went, and I completely forgot about it. He was born on the 20th of May. So I named him the name that he gave me in the session. It's a name I never would have thought of, but I gave it to him because he had to have that name. And so I thought, well, this is a piece of cake. So when she got pregnant again, I'm going to do this again and tell what it is. But I wanted a girl so bad. I wanted a boy and a girl, though I couldn't get past my humanness to divorce that and let the spirits tell me what was there. So I was unsuccessful at doing it. You had a guest on a couple of days ago that talked about this border between, you have to give up the human side of yourself completely. You have to put that out in order to embrace the spirituality that comes in. And that's what I found is true. When you're able to do that, you can do anything. Any of this, channeling is a piece of cake. I was with my sister-in-law, and I was telling her about this. She said, well, I don't think I can channel. I said, I bet I can have you channel in a minute. And she said, okay, how do you do it? So I got her to relax. I got her to deal, and I got her talking. And the next thing you know, she has broken into this really strong German accent, something that I tried to get her to do when she's just being herself, and she can't do it, telling me the story of a past life that I had with a guy named Charles Johansson, who was born in the 1920s in Cologne, Germany, fought his way across Germany at the start of he was not a soldier. He was trying to save the kids in Germany that were being persecuted, found himself in a cave in Austria and was shot twice, once in the chest and once in the thigh. Now, up until that time that I'd heard that past that experience, I had an extremely severe pain in my chest and in my thigh all the time. And when I was a kid and I'd get really sick, I'd see myself in a street in Paris, France, trying to move through the gunfire to get through the street. Over and over again, I had that vision. When I had that past life experience with my sister-in-law doing that for me, the pain left and I never saw that vision again. And so I wanted a bunch of times to go investigate Charles Johansson of Cologne, Germany, but I haven't had the resources to do that. So I've let it go. But it's very real. And I do believe that that was part of my life. And so I think that's why I came back so quick, because I was born in the late 40s. And I think it was because when you have that kind of a violent death, I think you come back to earth quickly. So one of the things I used to do because of my experiences with channeling and with trying to experience people and understand what it was, because all the time I'm with people and I'm getting this information from people about what's going on, who's angry, who's not. That guy doesn't really mean what he's saying, that kind of thing. That I used to play a game. I did a lot of flying. And when I went to get on the airplane, I'd say, well, I'm going to meet somebody on this plane today. And either I'm going to have something from them or they're going to have something from me. And I wonder what it's going to be. And I would go sit down on the plane, and the person who sat down with me every time, either my spirit guides would tell them the story of Bob or something like that. And I'd tell them that story. I didn't know what that meant to them or anything. I just say the story of Bob, or they'd tell me something that meant really helped me at the time. It goes back and forth all the time. It was a great game to play. And I would advise, if you want to have fun with yourself, do that. When you're close to somebody, say, they've got something for me. I'm just going to listen. And if your spirits are telling you, tell them the story of Mary Lou. Tell them that story, no matter how bizarre it seems, because there's some connection there you need to follow up on. Also, at this time, I in terms of choice, I ran across a poem that was written by a guy named Edward Markham called Outwitted. Have you ever heard that? He was a poet laureate of Oregon in the United States in the late 1900s. Very simple poem. It said, he drew a circle to put me out, heretic, rebel, thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle and took him in. And you can always choose the love. You can always choose. There was a guy named, the whole thing was he wrote a book called, I can't think of his name right now, and this would be, but he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, I know that one.
And you remember he talked about being in the concentration camps and choosing to be happy. That is the separation line between your spiritual side and your physical side. Because no matter the abuse you have in your physical side, you can choose to transcend above that. And you hear that all the time. That's what that Outwitted poem is about. I can always draw a circle to bring people in, no matter what they're doing to me. I worked for years on what Jesus said about turning the other cheek. That's the stupidest thing I ever heard of, turning the other cheek. Why would you do that? Well, see, you have to transcend your physicality to understand what turning the other cheek means is expressing love towards other people. No matter what they're doing to you, you can always choose to express love. I used to, when I was logging in my midlife, I had a career where I was a logger, and I drove by this house every day out in the rural Oregon, and it had a great big sign up there that said, the wages of sin is death. Well, you see that in the Pentecostal church all the time, the wages of sin is death. I mean, what in the world does that mean, the wages of sin is death? And then one day I got a little epiphany on that what it means is you've chosen to turn yourself from God. You've turned yourself away from grace. You've made the choice. And I always thought that sinning meant the mark. It's a little archery term that means you miss the mark when you shoot the arrow. And it means that you're ignoring the grace that's coming to you from the divine, and you're turning away from it. So that's the wages. You're turning your back on God, turning your back on the divine. So I started going through this stuff. Then in the late 90s, the disease got too much. I got to the point where at one time I was up for 2 days in a whole month. I was a senior manager for a big construction company, and so I was able to do a lot of my work from a distance. And some weeks I'd only work a couple of days, but I felt really strongly that there were certain operations that would happen where I knew what I had to do, but I couldn't do it because my body would rebel against me and keep me from doing it. So I felt that if I tried to do something in that environment, I was going to make a mistake and get somebody killed. This is big, heavy duty construction stuff. So I retired in 2000 at the age of 53. And I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I just knew that I had to do something to try and address this physical problems I was having. Went to Mayo Clinic. They did a complete workup. They said, we see about 200 people a year with your symptoms. It won't kill you, but it'll affect the quality of your life. And which is a little bit of an understatement. I've had cancer 3 or 4 times. It was a movie I was watching with this one actress that she was going to see the doctor. She was an old gal. And she said, go to see the doctor. She said, yeah, I'm going to see which bits they take this time. And that's how I felt. They're always taking a little bit more of me every time I go take a little bit here, a little bit there, part of this, part of that. And because of this, I was really struggling with trying to get along in life. I moved back to the country so that I could work outside and kind of be in touch with nature. And then a friend of mine called me up out of the clear blue sky and wanted to have lunch with me. And I went up to have lunch with him in Portland, a guy who I'd known since the 4th grade. He was a Vietnam, had come back from Vietnam. We were dear friends when we were younger. And he was in the 12-step method, and he was making amends. And I had never heard of that, making amends. Didn't even know about the 12-step method. He told me about it. And I said, John, you don't have to make any amends to me. We're good. We're cool. So we're talking with him, and he looked at me and he said, Denis, you're all screwed up. And I said, what do you mean you're all screwed up? He said, you got to go to the vets. You're all screwed up. And so he drugged me, kicking and screaming, to the VA. And through the VA, they diagnosed me with Agent Orange and completely disabled, 100% disabled, because of these physical problems with this cancers and stuff. They were all caused by Agent Orange, by the way. They're all attributed back to that. And as a result of that, that gave me a pension, which has allowed me to live. Now, you talk about going through your life and struggling and trying to do the right thing, and God will provide. I can honestly say that I've never in my life had to worry about what clothes to wear or what to put on or any of those things. I've done my share. I've worked hard in my life. I've always tried to be nice to people in my whole life. That was the overriding thing, was to be nice to people and be good to people. I don't understand why people are mean and nasty. I just don't want to be that person. And I've always been blessed with having this stuff come to me. I've got good friends. So now I'm fighting with trying to understand this physical thing. And I got another apparition. It's called YouTube. Okay. I'm in bad shape. Some days I get knocked down. I cannot get up. Completely out of it. So I started watching YouTube for something to do. At first I watched mechanic shows or engineering programs or things like that, or history programs. And amongst the history programs, I started watching these biblical archaeology shows where they're trying to correlate words in the Bible with biblical sites. And I love archaeology. It fascinates me. So they were quoting these quotes in the Bible. I'm saying, is that true? Is that what those guys said? So I dug out my Bible from wherever it was and started reading the passages, and I fell in love with the Bible again. Only this time, I didn't fall in love with the way the preacher was telling me. I fell in love with the actual words on the page. And I found a great bit of peace and a lot of opening in just reading the words. I had these, trying to understand why Jesus was saying these things, and what pops up is Chosen. And I started watching that series, Chosen, and they did such a beautiful job of presenting the human side of Jesus, because as a Catholic, he was God. He was up here, and he wasn't human, but he was human also. And I began to understand what his words meant and why, because he was human. It was just an eye-opener for me. So I'm experiencing all this stuff, and what do I run across? I run across this podcast called Love Covers Life. And I wondered what it was. And when I first turned it on, I've got to admit, I was really turned off. I thought it was going to be somebody preaching to me. I don't want to hear more preachers. I would try to listen to these biblical archaeology shows. My wife would say, don't put that stuff on. That's just a bunch of those preacher guys. I'm saying, but I'm learning something from them. I want to learn. So I decided to watch, and I watched your first broadcast, and I was hooked. I was hooked because the people that you get on your program are people that are telling the truth from experience. They have the experience of knowing. You had a healer on there one day, and he said, you can have a healing if you got a bunch of people together, but somebody in the group has to believe. And I had this vision again. I remembered in the Bible, Jesus talking about the guy coming up to me, come to my house. And he said, no, heal my servant, heal my servant. And Jesus said, give me 10 minutes and I'll come to your house. No, don't come to my house. I don't deserve to have you there. Just say the word and he'll be healed. And Jesus said, nowhere have I found somebody with your faith. Well, see, that's the faith he's talking about. He's talking about the faith of knowing. If you know, I know, anybody can channel. because I have the faith of knowing I've been there, I've done that. This healer talked about the fact that you got to have somebody in the group that has to, they know, they believe. I never made that association before between belief, because I believe, but I didn't really believe because I didn't know. But when you know, you truly believe. So in watching your programs, I did, once again, I came across a little blurb someplace, not in your, but on another one, that what I had to do in order to get by day to day was I had to have a routine. And the most important thing was routine is get up in the morning and make the bed. No matter how bad you feel, no matter how terrible it is, get up and make the bed. So I had modified that a little bit. Now I get up and I make the bed and I do my toilet stuff and get cleaned up and shave and take my medications and so forth. And then I'm ready to face the day. Sometimes I hobble down and sit in a chair for the rest of the day. Sometimes I go off and do something because things are working. But I do that every day religiously. Get up and make the bed. Also, you have to deal with, I found that I had to deal with the conflicts within me. That what I'm doing is I'm turning this thing that's happening to me back inside me. And I didn't know what to do about that. So I was asking God about that. What do I do about that? And one day, in the middle of prayer about that, 2 words popped into my head. Padre Pio. You know who Padre Pio is?
I don't.
Well, I didn't either. I said, that's stupid words, Padre Pio. And I go on fighting with myself. About 6 months later, I'm thinking, well, maybe somebody's trying to tell me something. So I Googled Padre Pio. Well, it turns out Padre Pio was a priest in Italy that had the stigmata. You know what the stigmata is? He had the wounds that Christ had on the cross.
Right.
They manifested themselves in his body. His palms would bleed, his forehead would bleed, his side would bleed. And he was an humble, all he wanted to be his whole life was a priest, just a parish priest. So he hated the fact that he had that stigmata. And he went out of his way to hide it because he didn't want people coming up to being hallelujah to him and stuff like that for being anything special. He wanted to be a priest. And I followed that message for a long time. And then one day I realized what it was telling me. What it was telling me with me is that this battle that I'm having, this war with this Agent Orange stuff, is something that I've chosen to experience here in this life. It's my stigmata. It's not anything religious. It's just what I have to deal with. And all I have to do is do what I do every day as best I can and let that thing be. Let it do what it wants to do. Because I'm telling you, I read all the classes on healing. I tried for 6 months to have an out-of-body experience. I read all the literature on it. Went through all the work. And then I met a medium one day, and she was a very good medium. And she's, you ought to stop trying to have those out-of-body experiences. And I said, why? What you know on? She said, well, you read like a book. That's how I could tell. She said, if you have an out-of-body experience, you're going to go away and never come back because you don't want to be here. So she said, if you want to stay here and deal with this now, you better stop trying to have out-of-body experiences. It's not your path. And so I said, well, okay, I can accept that. So because of this and because of my understanding that this Agent Orange stuff is something that I brought on myself, it's interesting because all the stuff that goes on doesn't manifest itself in a bad heart or a bad lung. Those all test fine at the hospital. I've had these episodes happen in front of doctors, and they put you in the stroke protocol, and they got you wheeling on the gurney, and they're sticking all the stuff in you and running all the tests and stuff. An hour or two later, you come out of it, and everything's fine. Everything goes. I don't know what's going on. They're saying you lose all control of who you are and what's going on. You get completely taken aback. I did talk to one physician who did a lot of research into Agent Orange, and he said, you're on the Agent Orange Express, and this is one of many stops along the way. And just learn to live with it. Do as best you can, deal with it as best you can. So I'm railing again at God, saying, darn it, I got to know about this. I have to know, why do I have to put up with this? What is going on? What have I chosen here? And I had a very beautiful epiphany. The epiphany was that, this has to do with the separation of your physical and your spiritual. Because what we know on this planet is we know this physical side. And the physical side composes of what I like to call the muddy river. Only I don't call it the muddy river. I got a more colorful colloquial term for the muddy river. But I call it the muddy river. And what happens is the muddy river is washing over you all the time. I couldn't understand why I was getting all of this negative stuff all the time when I'm trying to meditate. I'm trying to be good to people. I'm trying to be a good person. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to do what's right. And I'm getting whacked all the time with this negative in and out, this monkey brain and grabbing this stuff and just driving me crazy. And I was made aware that when we created, as spirits, created the physical world as a place to go and learn, if you look at from your, and I get this from your podcast, all of the people that have related what they've seen in heaven all say that there's none of the physical traits in heaven, in the spirit guide, in the spirit place, whatever that is. I call it heaven, but whatever you call it is fine. The spiritual side has none of the fear, judgment, anger, any of that negative stuff. None of it's there. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in their frame of reference. It's not there at all. So we created this space on earth to come and experience that. That comes to us at spades with the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst, because we created it that way so that we can make the choice to move beyond it. Because what we have is free will and choice. It's all about free will and choice. And right away, as soon as I had that epiphany, I saw Viktor Frankl in the concentration camp choosing to be happy. And I realized that, hey, this stuff, this garbage that comes to me every day is a blessing. This gives me a chance to choose. It gives me a chance to be loving and positive in spite of what's going on inside of me. Because I don't care how bad the pain is. I don't care how bad the disruption is. I can always choose to move beyond that. So I asked for some help in how to choose beyond that. And the strangest thing came up. I was told two things. I was told, go back to church and pray. Not for the fact that the Catholic Church is anything special. It's because of all the negativity I'm carrying from the Catholic Church is not doing me any good. That has to do with my own personal prejudices and negativity. And the only way that I can get past that is to go embrace it and embrace it for love. And so I said, well, I don't know how to pray. Well, you know, Hail Marys and Our Fathers. So good old Catholic standard, I started saying my Hail Marys and Our Fathers. If I have a very particular tough time, I just say a few Hail Marys and Our Fathers and work my way through it. To me, it's like meditating. It's the same thing. You're getting your mind off of all that turmoil and focusing it on something positive. In the church, I had to give up all the prejudices I had toward the people giving me prejudices, because I associated everything in the church with prejudice. And I had to stop and open myself up and listen to what was actually going on. And what I found is there was a lot of very lovely people there that are trying their best to do the right thing for themselves. The church is not important. Whether it's any particular religion or no religion or anything else, what's important is loving people, playing the circle game, drawing the circle to bring people in, and making the choice to do these positive, right things. Listen to the voices. Pay attention to what's going on, what's coming to you, and how to deal with your day-to-day. And that gives you an opportunity. So I wasn't going to share this with you, but I will. I was in church a couple of months ago, and I'd had a particularly hard week, and I was trying to make sense that in one of your podcasts, this gal said that when she came back from her near-death experience, every time she'd hear music, she would see the notes of the music bouncing off the floors, you know. And I've been a musician all my life, and the guy that works in the church there that I go to is kind of a piano pounder. There's people that caress the keys, and he's a pounder. He's a pounder away all the time. It's a little bit abrasive for me to listen to piano pounding. So I'm saying, well, I've got to really try to embrace the beauty in this music. I need to embrace what's there. So I'm working on that. And at the end of the Mass, I was sitting there trying to embrace that, trying to put aside my feelings and prejudices and all this other stuff, just to embrace what's there. And all of a sudden, right in front of me, everything just went gold. From floor to ceiling to the top went gold. And there was a figure at the top looking down, smiling at me. And it lasted for about 10 seconds, then it went away. And so I think we all get these kinds of things that come to us for us. If you're working really hard and trying really hard to do the right thing, this stuff's going to come to you. You just got to let it in. The one last thing I want to talk about is a little bit about my brother. My brother was gay, and he fought with being gay his whole life. He tried to commit suicide several times. And every time he tried to commit suicide, an angel would come to him, a physical angel would come to him and stop him. You can't do that. You got to let that go. And he got involved with a thing called the Beal Ciphers, which was a document that came out in the 1800s about a guy that purportedly went back and got a bunch of gold and buried it there in Virginia. And he wrote these ciphers, a document that has a bunch of numbers on it, and it associates with some key someplace else. And if you can discover what the key is to the cipher, you can solve the cipher. Well, Tom determined to solve the cipher, and he did. But it wasn't what he thought it was. He wrote a book about it. And the book has two parts to it. The first part is his spiritual journey, which was well worth reading. I mean, because the things he discovered, it's well worth reading for somebody that goes through a lot of stuff. By the way, he died the last December 31st. The second part has to do with ciphering. And I suppose if you're really into ciphering, it might be really interesting too. But I didn't find it so interesting. I found the first part very interesting. That was the book I asked you to include in my notes where he could become, because I think a lot of people could learn from his acceptance, in his case, of his gayness and what he could do about that and how he could transcend and still love people. And I'm telling you, he was my mentor. He taught me much more than I ever taught him. Really a beautiful person. So that's what I do. I get up every day and make the bed and try to get by with as best I can.
Denis, thank you so much for sharing from your personal experiences. And I have so just enjoyed hearing your story and all the wisdom that you've had to share from your lifetime of everything that you've experienced. I just want to thank you so much for being willing to share and put your story out there and give you a chance to share with the viewers where they can find you and where they can find your brother's book.
I'm willing to talk to anybody that wants to email me and talk to me. I don't have a podcast or anything like that. I think it's just important for people to remember they can always choose. You can always make the choice to do what turns you toward the light as opposed to dwelling in the darkness, dwelling in the muddy river.
Wonderful. Denis, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Mel. I'm glad you asked me.
Thank you for watching and listening. Your views, likes, comments, and shares truly make the biggest difference in supporting this channel. Don't forget to check the show notes for all the links to today's guest, as well as my links. You'll find me on social media at Love Covered Life, my website, lovecoveredlife.com, and the Be a Guest link for anybody who would like to be a guest on the channel. I have great news. Love Covered Life podcast is coming available on audio podcast. You can find it wherever you listen to your audio podcasts.